Today we know that ego strengthening is central to all psychotherapy and treatment. Building on her father's work, Anna Freud recognized that it's normal to have defense mechanisms. We all have them. It's part of healthy living and adjustment. And it was understanding this that enabled her to work with young children, putting psychotherapy for children truly on the map. Welcome to The Art of Therapy, Season 3, Episode 4.
Just to reflect a bit on our last episode. So with our last episode, we really started to have a look at Carl Jung and how he really just developed on Freud's theory and understanding of human nature.
Yes.
And just how he further developed the unconscious mind, but also added the collective unconscious and what that means to human functioning. And what he also had a look at is how people grow and develop, and they create in this individualization. But then also his expansion on libido and sexual energy into life energy, and how that creates integration for human beings, and that any challenges that human beings face is that he positioned it as an invitation to grow, invitation to wholeness, and it's actually not it's not pathology. It's not a problem. It's actually just the invitation to grow.
Yes, the most beautiful work that expanded on Freud's work, and the call to adventure.
Yes. Yeah, and I think then for us to move the focus to another theorist today, and one of the ones that comes up is of course Anna Freud, she being the youngest daughters of Freud, and that remarkable work in understanding psychotherapy and understanding healing, and a special work with children as well, so that we delve into that and make a bit more sense of that.
Right. Yes.
So just with Anna Freud, how do you see her contributions to psychotherapy and creating that lens of psychotherapy?
She contributed greatly. One way of punctuating is that where Freud had left off in the 1930s, she now picks up. And really, her work was influential from the 1930s, continued developing into the 1970s. So having the most remarkable impact. And something that was interesting about Anna Freud is, as you noted, daughter of Freud and the youngest, she was a teacher, but she also was and had experienced analysis. She had experienced psychoanalysis with her father. Now today that would seem unusual or a bit weird. And of course, things are very different today. At that time, there were very few specialists, very few psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and this was a remarkable skill. This thinking, this understanding. And so there was just very few people one could get assistance from. Today, psychotherapy, as we know, is just really developed. And one can get psychotherapy and support in so many different ways. But at that time, very limited. And so she underwent the psychoanalysis with her father. And through her own thinking, through her experience, Anna Freud began to review the ego. If we looked at, and just going back to Carl Jung, a lot of his work developed and expanded on the unconscious. But Anna looked at more the ego. And that's why today we know of it as really as ego psychology. And what she recognized is that the ego is actually a very autonomous and independent part of each of us in terms of the way we relate, the way we think. That it's more than just managing these deep instinctual processes, the id and the conflict between the id and our superegos and the demands of reality, what she recognized is a very big part of the ego is independent and autonomous. Many of our functioning, our memories, our cognition, our planning, our executive functions, all of this actually is all part and mediated by the ego. And that the ego isn't only around managing conflict and managing anxiety. It is part of the expression of joy, pleasure, happiness. And it's really this part of ourselves that's and it is very independent and autonomous. And once one understands this, because this is what she began to give expression to, that too extended our understanding and removed any of the fear and barriers around psychotherapy. And we see that today in hypnosis. You're very experienced in hypnotherapy. And yes, I'm sure as you and I have discussed and explored that in hypnotherapy, there are remarkable qualities that each individual possesses: creativity, energy, drive, expressions of who they are that aren't necessarily conflict-based. They're just another dimension of themselves that they can tap into. This is really a very big part of what Anna recognized, this autonomous, independent ego that's responsible for a very big part of the way we relate to the world.
Mm-hmm. I think that's beautiful again. It's an expansion. It's taking knowledge and the experience and a first-hand experience of psychoanalysis and then going and expanding on that and seeing that the ego is not just about managing the conflict, but it's a whole new dimension, like you said. It is what is part of us, what drives us.
Yes.
What is our strength as well.
Yes, indeed. And to add something that she introduced was that with Freud, her father, and Jung, there were aspects of unconscious processes that were considered, that there were areas of difficulty or something to be concerned about. Less so with Carl Jung as he began to look at this, the process of individuation and then the archetypes and collective unconscious. And Anna really took this forward and showed that the ego utilizes highly adaptive responses, and that the defense mechanisms that her father identified and Jung had expanded on, she went and looked at these really thoroughly and recognized that it's part of adaptive, normal, healthy functioning, that the ego can adaptively deploy a series of strategies unconsciously to manage anxiety and our interactions with the environment in a way that's positive, needed, that it isn't simply always getting in the way, that it's adaptive. And she actually went and catalogued a number of the defense mechanisms, but looked at them so thoroughly. And that was her 1936 work, a remarkable work, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense. And when she showed that now meant that analysts could now begin to understand and look for and explore healthy defense mechanisms in clients and understand what was happening in terms of the ego and the kinds of conflicts. And so she would take something like repression and show that that's adaptive. There's a place when we've been exposed to something very distressing or traumatic that we can repress that. And it's functional. We've seen that often, and I wonder, I would think that you've seen it often in therapy, working with trauma, where someone's been exposed to something where they were powerless, terrified, and how they could effectively take that experience and repress it and push it away for years until it was safe for that to come back into consciousness and to begin working with it.
I agree with you. I think it really takes it to pathology, to just it's a coping and adapting and allowing people to live their lives when it's needed.
Yes.
And only when it is, like you say, when it's safe, then they can go and deal with it. But it doesn't, it's defense mechanisms, we should have them.
Yes.
It's actually needed for survival, and understanding that, and then looking at how the ego actually facilitates that. I think it's beautiful to understand it.
Yes. This is so important because it's, as you say, it's needed for life. It has its place. So she, would take something like repression. Then she considered and showed that denial, yes, denying painful aspects of reality, there's a place for that. We see that, for instance, where someone has lost someone they love, a cherished, meaningful relationship. Who can withstand that? The pain, the loss, the anguish. And so we know that one of the stages of grief is that it's so overwhelming that we initially react with denial. We just can't take it in. It seems unreal. But as time progresses, we begin to process parts of that and understand that, but in a way that's less overwhelming. So she showed us where denial fits in as a healthy defense mechanism.
Psychotherapy is not only a profession, it's a state of being. And for that, it requires continuous learning, training, and refining your skills. If you would like to become better in your role as a psychotherapist, come and join Dr. Warwick Phipps for in-person training at Treatment Work Center, where you will experience training like never before from a thought leader and expert in psychotherapy. If you would like some more information on our training or to book a training session, please visit the link in the description. And also, if you find these podcast episodes meaningful, please subscribe to The Art of Therapy. I think it's just beautiful. It just shows that how our mind works is that it creates when there's safety and when it's the right time, then it can be dealt with and worked through. And that it was just it's a protective factor for that time. And then moving through that into a stage where you can actually go and deal with it. And then the defense is not necessary anymore.
Indeed, that's it. And that was really sensitive of her. She recognized that there was a projection. And again, one just cannot consider one's own unpleasant, anxiety-provoking, distressing traits. It's projected, where one can see it in others and at some point begin to recognize it in oneself. Rationalisation, she noted that. Just seemingly that we each can come up with a very logical explanation, but which is actually is not the true reason for our behavior. It's false, but on the surface it's logical. There's a place for that. Sometimes we can't quite go there. Either expressing some aspect of our behavior, actions, thoughts to another, to ourselves. We just can't quite go there. And so we rationalize. And we see that, for instance, in addiction, where is often denial, very strong rationalization. So, yes, that she began to explore and look at each of the defense mechanisms and show how they're healthy in everyday life, what they show about unconscious conflicts, and where they can now become a barrier when things are taken too far. For instance, we see that if there's denial in addiction, there's going to be some point, if that denial is maintained, there's not going to be any real working through of that addiction or rationalization, how that can become a block if it's rigid or expressed constantly over time. So she showed here that there's balance. And moreover, once she'd understood the autonomous role of ego and how it's here to help us adapt, it's healthy, what she was able to then explore is, well, what does this mean for children? How do we work with children? Because she was sensitive to recognize that, of course, process of free association with psychoanalysis require very high verbal ability, but a child doesn't have that. But they too have their own psychological part, that ego, that's part of their adaptation and how they're growing and developing. And so she did several remarkable things. First of all, showed that the first goal in psychotherapy is both to understand the defense mechanisms and recognize them as really healthy, but also then to assess ego strength. That, yes, going and exploring deeper conflicts, aspects of the past, it's a timing issue. One's got to be ready for that. So, and that just immediately going into it may not be healthy. So she actually introduced this understanding of ego health or ego strengthening. Is the ego ready? If she's working with an adult or a child where there's a lot of defenses and being utilized in ways that are not helpful or excessive, one can see there that the ego is going to need more strengthening, more work before one can go into deeper conflicts, emotional dissonance. So she showed us that our defenses are helpful, effective, needed, and that especially if one considers now children, how do we work with children? And I'll note that just now, but the importance of timing and both understanding the ego and strengthening it before launching into deeper work.
It's not taking away the defensive prematurely, but actually working with the ego first.
That's it.
And then going and looking at the conflicts, because there's a reason for those defenses.
Exactly.
Yes.
When it's so sensitive. And that's today what really that contribution, that thinking is part of how come we feel so safe, so secure in a therapeutic process. Because we know that the therapist will get to things at the right time and the right way when it's safe. And so part of that, yes, comes all this ways, understanding the importance of ego strength, timing, and recognizing that defense mechanisms are a key part of life.
Yes, yes. When they're normal and adaptive.
Normal, indeed, yes. So it's, she did remarkable work, and yes, her work with children, up until that time, it was much more difficult. How would one apply psychoanalytic principles? But she recognized that children communicate in other ways. They communicate through play, through fantasy, through their drawing. And she realized that if you just observe a child with very little structure, you're actually, they are free associating. They expressing very spontaneously through their behavior, through the way they're relating, many of these unconscious associations. And so that was, it was wonderful because she now began to bring psychotherapy and translate that. And so for the first time, psychotherapists, psychologists psychiatrists could start working with children, utilizing art therapy, play therapy. You do a lot of remarkable play therapy. Some of this goes back to Anna Freud.
To Anna Freud, yes. And I think it's beautiful because I think what she showed is all behavior is communication. And we just need to observe, we need to see and understand what's being communicated.
Yes.
And with her work on children is actually understanding their communication. And like I say, it was free association, but through play, just in a different way.
Exactly.
But it was already there.
Yeah, that was such creativity, and how perceptive of her to recognize this.
Yes.
Yeah, just another way of free associating.
Yes, yes. And it just makes me think about one of the defense mechanisms of children and one that therapist deals with a lot is sometimes bedwetting.
Yes.
And where a child actually consolidated the potty training, but then something happened, a trauma, or there was an adjustment, and then suddenly they started bedwetting again. And that it can actually be seen as a defense mechanism of regression.
Right.
And that it is, again, it's not necessarily that it's pathology or that it's difficulties, but they need that time to work through it. Maybe need that nurturing, that safety from their parents again.
Yes.
And then it is consolidated again.
So much so. I'm so glad you've noted that, because we're so, and I think people are very often inclined to frame something like bedwetting as a problem, and yes, for parents and caregivers and family members, it can be distressing. And so, yeah, understandably, it can be framed as a problem. But the moment you recognize, okay, here's a child that's also adapting, and this can be a defense mechanism, that the ego is deploying a defense mechanism to manage anxiety, and it's just temporary. It's an unconscious process where the child is regressing to an earlier, more immature aspect of their development functioning, but it serves a purpose. And once one can understand that and assist the child to work through it and relieve that, along with their parents in some meaningful way, wow, well, that defense mechanism is no longer needed. And we see with children just how responsive they are, that with inputs and support from parents and the right kind of therapeutic inputs, how quickly they continue, how quickly they adapt. They're remarkable.
They're so resilient.
Yes, yeah. So this really all goes back to Anna Freud, just the most remarkable contribution. Also, what I would just add is understanding the importance of ego strengthening, assessing ego strength. That has contributed greatly today to our working approach to trauma. We know that when someone's traumatized, immediately when one is with someone who's traumatized, who's so shocked, that the first objective goal is to help with ego strengthening, helping them reorientate in a way that's safe and engaging them, helping them. So we're busy with ego strengthening, and with any kind of trauma work, any further work and going into that will be done later. But the first goal is make safe, establish, and help with ego, strengthening that resilience, that reorientation. So these ways of thinking and the way we can so much more meaningfully, rapidly help people who are experiencing deep trauma. Here is a profound contribution of Anna Freud.
And it goes back all the way to Anna Freud.
Yes. And so often we utilize these developments as thinking, and we just tap into it. But without even in that moment necessarily going, where's this? Where does this fit in? But it's just there. But yeah, it's times like this where we can reflect and explore part of how this lens has emerged in psychotherapy and our different lenses that we use integratively.
Yes. It all contributes, it all adds, and that the more lenses we have, the more we can understand human beings, human functioning.
Yes.
And when we understand it, of course, we can help more.
Indeed.
That's the goal
That's
of psychotherapy.
what it's all about.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's just amazing. It's amazing to have a look at Anna Freud and her contributions and how a lot of therapists actually utilize it in their day-to-day practice, and how it goes all the way back to her and how she developed that. And I think the more we know, the more we can actively work with it and deal with it.
Yes.
So I think it's fascinating. And again, I know I say this every time, but I'm really excited to go even further on this and explore even more lenses.
Yes, I share that. I too am excited. As we look at it, it's more and more meaningful. and then we look ahead and it's more exciting.
Exactly, yes. Thank you for joining us on The Art of Therapy. If you found this episode meaningful, or if it expanded your knowledge, we would love to hear from you in the comments section. We are looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Until our next episode.